Yes, we should also talk about the fact that we, as time progressive, know more and more that part of Hamas's mission was to sexually assault Israeli women. This is a story that we will talk about, the brave women and men who have brought this to the forefront of the international community. And of course, the depravity of how long it took. I believe it's 54 days for UN Women and the UN to acknowledge the fact that this was indeed part of the warfare. It is a very, very difficult thing to look straight in the eye. I have had people who I really respect in the beginning of the war asking me, but is there any proof that this actually happened? Well, sadly, a lot of the proof was murdered. And that is also the modus operandi of these terrorists. But we now know much more about what was done, sadly, to and tragically and terribly to women during this dark day of October 7th.
This has become a really central arena or battleground in the international argument about the war, more and more. There were this big gathering where there was a message from Hillary Clinton, for example, a big gathering at the United Nations in New York, hundreds of experts, women, activists, to discuss the testimony, the evidence that's coming to light. And a lot of the campaign, we've talked about it before on the podcast, is a kind of reproach to UN Women, the body that exists to fight violence against women and girls, but also a whole variety of feminist groups and women's organizations who have not been alive to alert to this issue and have been so slow to speak about it. There is a sort of unofficial commission of inquiry that's seeking to gather evidence, the initial forensic evidence that in a crime scene you would have gathered. It was just not possible in in a location of a massacre. But more and more testimony is coming to light, and it is now being shown to international audiences and opinion formers, and some of that came to light. The centrality of it is partly about winning this argument internationally against those who are saying, look, we get it. It was really bad. 1,200 died on October 7th. But look, the Israeli response now is killed so many more people and surely can't be justified. That's a body of opinion that exists outside Israel. The counter argument to that is, don't just look at the numbers dead on October the 7th. Instead, look at the nature of the sadism, the cruelty, the nature of the crimes. And central to that is the notion of sexual violence, the torture, the mutilation, and so on. And just to give a very literal example of how, central this is, or a very direct example rather, Matthew Miller, the United States spokesman at the State Department, gave a briefing this week in which he didn't say it was hard fact, but he said it seemed to him that one of the reasons why the rolling ceasefires came to a halt last week was because the next group of hostages to be released included a lot of women, young women included, and his conjecture was that Hamas did not want those women released because they would testify as to what had happened to them, including and especially on October the 7th. He later softened that and said, look, it was his own theory, it was his own speculation, but lots of people have been similarly speculating that those women and what they can testify to is damning evidence against Hamas. It goes to this argument that this wasn't, as it were, just a matter of killing people. It was a matter of a particular heinous danger. And that is something that will be alarming to Hamas, not just in terms of Western opinion, but also in the wider Arab and Muslim world, that the notion of Hamas men committing this kind of crime, even the kind of people in the Muslim world who might want to defend Hamas as resistance and noble fighters against Israeli occupation and so on, would have much less truck with these kinds of crimes. This is a propaganda problem for Hamas. And it just gives you one example. The fact that maybe it played a part in preventing the ceasefires continuing and the hostage releases continuing tells you this isn't just any kind of side issue. If you were making the mistake of thinking this is a side issue, it's a mistake. I think it is increasingly central in the argument around this war.
and should be central, and these stories should be told more and more. And I think we should point out that there has been work being done here, bringing this into the focus of the international community. If it was up only to the international community, they could have disregarded this completely. But there has, and you mentioned this, the commission, civil commission of war crimes. It's Kochav El-Kayam Levi, who's a law professor and dealing with that. There's Shari Mendez of the Body Identification Center here in Israel. There's, of course, the investigative branch of the Israeli police, Lahav 433, that have been dealing with this specifically, and the foreign ministry. And we should also point out journalists like our friend Biana Golodriga and like Jake Tapper on CNN, who have been dealing with this more and more and saying this was a central part of Hamas's mission on October 7th. It's very, as I said, Jonathan, I've been here. You've been here also. Living through and listening to all of these atrocities is a difficult thing to do, not only as a journalist, of course, but as a Israeli, and more than that, as a person. And I know how difficult it is to just think of the fact that these were young women, some of them party goers at the Nova Festival, some of them living on the kibbutzim. These were their last minutes on earth, and this is what they went through. It's terrible, but we need to give voice to these women, and we need to talk about it, because this is what happened. And it has the context of this war. We can't ignore it. When people call for a ceasefire and say, we have to stop this, great, but what would you plan? How do you deal with this devil who did this to you once and says it will continue to do it if you call for a ceasefire? It's all connected to how, we look at this place that we are at 2 months in.